I think a lot of times we're missing some of the roots. And one of the roots of good hormonal health is actually good blood sugar because good blood sugar balance ultimately takes the stress off our body. So we can either produce those hormones in the right amount or our body can utilize them better.
I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little more love.
I'm your host, Krista Bigler, and I'm going to guess we have at least one thing in common, that we're both in pursuit of a less stressed life. On this show, I'll be interviewing experts and sharing clinical pearls from my years of practice to support high-performing, health-savvy women in pursuit of abundance and a less stressed life. One of my beliefs is that we always have options for getting the results we want, so let's see what's out there together.
Just keep breaking. I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little more love.
All right, today on The Less Stressed Life, I have Isaac Pohlman. Isaac was inspired to pursue nutrition after developing a series of health issues, including hypothyroidism, low testosterone, chronic fatigue, cystic acne, and type 1 diabetes during his high school and early college days. His formal education includes human physiology and nutritional sciences, including internships to become a registered dietitian and then mentorships under Morley Robbins' root cause protocol and independent research. He currently helps adults with type 1, type 2, and prediabetes improve their blood sugar control without cutting out carbs in his program, the Balanced Blood Sugar Roadmap. Welcome, Isaac.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. So let's talk about that crap storm of a health situation you had. I'd love to hear about when it sounds like maybe you were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in high school, potentially. Is that where it all started?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting start. So I actually wasn't diagnosed with diabetes in high school. It was actually in college, but interesting thing
Odd.
came about in high school. So it was around my sophomore year. I was getting really heavy into like soccer. It was a sport that I was getting more and more serious about. There were coaches that said, "Hey, Isaac, you should probably pursue this as a college thing. I think you'd be really good at it." And I was like, "Okay, that I've never heard that before, but let's try it out." And so I got more and more serious with it, started to play more travel teams. And I think the pressure of that too got to me, at least at that time, with wanting to get into a really good school and wanting to perform really well in athletics because now I had this new pressure that I should be a college soccer player. I think at that time there's a lot of stress on me internalized and I trained a lot. So I'd play like a 90-minute match and then like practice right afterwards. And so at that time, I really didn't have a solid understanding of nutrition as I do now in the recovery process. And the reason I say that is because in some degree, I think I burnt out a little bit, just undernourishing, overtraining in a sense. And at that time, I started to notice where I felt like less and less hungry, especially like to start the day or at lunchtime or dinner time, where normally I would be eating like double the size of people like 2 times bigger than me. Like I was known as that person that would just eat a ton of food. And so it was really an abnormal thing. And slowly but surely I started to lose weight. And at that time I was like probably 100 pounds, 5'5". So very like rail skinny. Like I really couldn't afford to lose weight. And yet that's what I did. And so I got down to 85 pounds. And at that time I was really fatigued. It was in the midst of like basketball conditioning. So the last place that you really want that to happen. And so we didn't really understand what was going on. I got a bunch of tests done. They were like, "You have slow digestion." Went up to Mayo Clinic and they're like, "You have gastroparesis," they called it. And so if you're not familiar with gastroparesis, it's basically a slow emptying of the stomach. And it's thought to be sometimes like a complication of type 1 diabetes. Now, I didn't have any signs of type 1 at that time. My A1C was just fine. My blood sugar was just fine, but that's what they diagnosed with me at that time. And so after that point, I didn't quite recover until I started working with people like Josh because I felt like the fatigue never really resolved. And I was still struggling with that even into my college days. And I ended up pursuing like college soccer and I did okay, but the edge they had in high school was now gone because I was just fatigued and didn't really have the extra gear that I had before. And so I had the writing on the wall. And to couple that with academics, like I really wasn't doing good in school at all. It was like the first time I got like below a 3.0 in my life. And then I was struggling with soccer. And so it was like a really big identity crisis for me too at
Mm.
that time. So just a lot of things. I had more symptoms. Now I had food intolerances and cystic acne and low testosterone in addition to the fatigue. And so it was like
Mm.
everything was hitting the fan at the same time. Really wasn't getting very many answers from my doctors. Like, hey, Isaac, your labs look normal. You're making this up in your head. And I read the reports of the doctor's note and they said that like this guy is making this up in his head. And so that felt very invalidating, of course, because I didn't know what was going on. And I felt physically that I wasn't right. And so that's where I really started to pave my own path in terms of going into the health space. And I knew nutrition as far as performance nutrition, but certainly not to the extent that I probably needed it at that time. And so that's where I started doing my own research, really diving into books, articles, the rabbit holes of the internet, just to explore what was really wrong with me. And I came across people like Ray Peat and Josh Rubin that were really big inspirations of my work, and started working with Josh at that around that time and really improved my ability to manage my fatigue. My energy went up. My mood, my personality just totally shifted in a positive way. And everything was going well up until that point. But I think I still had some qualities that probably weren't still supportive of me. I went on to grad school at the University of Michigan, and it was a great time, but it was also very stressful. For me, I was working part time. I was participating in entrepreneurship competitions. I really didn't understand quite then like the need for like self-care and really pausing and taking breaks. I was all in all the time, it felt like.
Mhm.
And around my last year at Michigan, I started noticing some weird symptoms come about. I was never somebody to drink a lot of water, but I was noticing I was drinking gallons, like gallons of water each day. And I was like really thirsty. I'd wake up in the middle of the night needing like a huge glass of water just to be quenched. And I thought, that's weird. I've never had that before. And then I would wake up the next morning and it's like you have that sensation where you really have to go to the bathroom and pee. And it was like that sensation, like, all throughout the day, especially when I woke up. And so I thought, "That's really weird. Let me check my weight." And I was down like 10 pounds from where I
Mm.
normally stand. I was logging my intake at that time too, and I was eating about 3,000, 3,500 calories and still losing weight. So it was like, wow, like, something's going on here. My first thought was like, I have diabetes. But then I was like, I don't know. I have a lot of stress going on. I can't have diabetes. And so I passed it off for the week and I was like, these symptoms aren't improving. In fact, they're getting worse. I'm feeling really lethargic anytime I eat, especially with something with carbs. It's got to be related to my blood sugar. So I went into my local grocery store. It was Meyer in Michigan at that time. And I got a glucometer, which is the meter that you use to check your blood sugar with, and checked my blood sugar. It was 275. So I thought, wow, yeah, I definitely do have some form of diabetes here. It's just a matter of, hey, is this probably type 1 or type 2? And the antibody test came back the next week, which is how they confirm type 1 diagnosis. And the GAD65 antibody was the one that was positive for me. And so from there, it was interesting. Of course, it was a tough battle and a tough transition. And it's never something I think is easy to be given a diagnosis like that, but I think it's also given me a place to help support others, because the first thing I hear from other people that either follow my work or I work with is, you have type 1 diabetes, so you know what it feels like to maybe have blood sugar that isn't balanced and is affecting your day to day. And so having that personal relationship with them, I think increases a lot of the buy-in that I get with clients. And I love supporting them as best I can because I've been that person that was scared and fearful and not really sure what to do. And it's really allowed me to focus in on a particular niche when it comes to coaching as well. So it's a blessing in disguise, I think. Wasn't easy by any means at the beginning, but that's really how I got into more of the blood sugar nutrition side of things. It was more of my personal journey.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I have a couple questions. You had started working in a very, I would say, specific niche, a mineral niche, functional medicine in college. Fortunately, I wonder if you had some strikeouts before then, because that was a lucky place to land, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was. And that's the thing I didn't mention is I went through a series of things that really didn't work. I went to, after my visits with like more conventional doctors, I ended up going to like naturopaths. And at that time, and I don't know really, I would say I know a little bit of how it is now because I have clients that work with naturopaths. And I think they can be very supportive. I also think at times they can overprescribe like supplements, and there can
Mhm.
be like a list of 10, 20 different supplements and the client doesn't even know why they're taking them.
Mhm.
And so that was my experience too. It was like a restrictive diet. At that time, I think it was like the popular thing was like paleo. And so it
Mhm.
was like, hey, yeah, you got to do paleo. Here's your book on paleo, and here's 20 different supplements to take.
Mhm.
And so I went down that supplement rabbit hole where I was taking all these things, I was buying all these supplements, and it wasn't really working. So I didn't understand what was up. And so I went really back to, does it really make sense for me to be consuming all these supplements? And does this really have an impact? And could it have a negative impact? And that's
Mhm.
really what I started to dive into with Josh and minerals is it's not always about all the supplementation. It's about doing the right things. And sometimes those extra supplements can actually be working against you. And so that was one thing I had to learn. So I certainly didn't hit the nail on the head right away, but eventually I got to that point out of some trial and error.
Yeah, and like you, used to think that functional medicine meant you go to someone, they give you a zillion supplements, it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars, then you come back and then they throw it all out and try a new one, and that was a huge issue to me, and
Yeah,
so I would say this is the challenge where there's actually now a big gray area in functional medicines. What's your actual philosophy around that stuff? Because for me, I have that wound of that, so I like people to use up their stuff. I really like people to understand what they're doing, so they're not just being pulled by a leash through it. I really like that's like my dream is for people to understand what they're doing so they can address things on their own afterwards. So I hear that you had those same pains. And I think if you haven't gone through that, you can't appreciate a different model necessarily always, right? Like you can't appreciate that
right.
it's ultimately more sustainable to go the model you went. Now, I'm curious, you did have some initial massive success around fatigue, et cetera, earlier in college. And how long did that take for you to see those changes?
Yeah, yeah. I think it took me actually just a couple weeks to start seeing some
Mm.
initial positive results. The thing that I had to really do was in my start, like before even working with Josh or anybody else, like I really started to understand the need that I probably need to eat a little bit more. Now, I probably went a little bit too fast into it. Knowing what I know now, I had a really low metabolism. My body wasn't able to process those calories and carbs very effectively. And so I went full bore into it where I just started to eat whatever I could and it really boosted up my calories. And then as a result, I gained weight in the process too. And it was probably needed to some extent to recover maybe some of that muscle and even just healing tissue, I think. But I think I did it probably too fast and even what Josh would have recommended at that time. And so as a result, I gained weight. But I felt there were so many positives that occurred that I pushed that a little bit to the side. Not to say that it was something that I wanted, but like it was something, there were so many positives. My whole mood, my whole demeanor shifted. I was able to laugh again. I was able to make jokes again, where previously I was so serious about life, so fearful about everything. And I was just felt so much more calm, so much more resilient, so much able to better manage stress just as a result of just eating more. And within a couple weeks, I saw that. So it did take time for it to fully recover, and the mineral piece was a part of that with like morally. But initially seeing benefits with just strictly eating enough to be able to recover from probably from high school, which I never quite recovered from up until that point. I really think I needed the extra boost, and that's what that provided me at that time.
Yeah, you should add athlete recovery to your mini niche. I care a ton about that topic too, because it's
Yeah,
like, it's amazing. Especially, I personally feel so I started at a really big sports school my freshman year, and they had a special cafeteria for the athletes there. It was like a huge
yeah,
deal. And then some of the athletes I've worked with, the college athlete girls, I see absolutely the opposite. I've seen girls at small private universities doing multiple sports and barely nourishing. And there's a whole toxicity in sports, especially female sports, around shrinking women for sure. And like the coaches having, because most of the baloney that's perpetuated in any place is like everyone's own personal crap they're projecting on the next kids.
yeah.
So it's interesting.
It
Okay.
is.
So let's talk about your diabetes diagnosis. So, first of all, it's considered atypical, right, to be diagnosed that late. And I'm just curious. I have a really good friend who also, I think, I don't know what age he was when he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, but he definitely has some feelings about why his body went into that autoimmune reaction. And we might call them like fringe theories. And so I'm
Yep.
curious if you have any fringe conspiracy
Yeah.
theories about your type 1 diabetes by chance.
I do, and I wanna keep this in context too, because I think sometimes when I say this, people take it out of context and are like, "This is just a theory that I have." It's not. It is somewhat research based, just my understanding of autoimmune diseases in general,
Mhm.
but I think there still needs to be some work done around proving that. But one of the most influential books that I have read was by Gabor Mate.
Mhm.
It's titled When the Body Says No. And
Mhm.
it's all about autoimmune disease. I don't know if you've ever read that,
I
Crystal.
haven't
Crystal.
yet, but I know it's like one of the top recommendations.
Yeah, yeah, it's really good, it's really good. And it's interesting, like, basically what he says is, like, the immune disease personality. He doesn't call it that, but that just for simplistic verbing, that's what I interpreted it as, and it's basically saying that people with autoimmune disease, a lot of them have challenges with respecting their own boundaries
Mm,
to the point where the person that they are, it's hard to separate them versus everybody else. And so, like, it's a lot of people that put like others before themselves. It's a lot of
mm,
people that might put others at the expense of themselves. And I was certainly that case.
mm,
I think, growing up, I have a tendency to like people please too.
mhm,
Like, wanting to people to like me. And over time, I don't know if that's something that you all like totally outgrow, but I think
mhm.
I've gotten better with that and just taking things as is. But at that time, I especially cared what people thought of me. And
By the way?
I'm a
Just
twin. I'm a twin. So I'm 30 seconds younger than my twin sister. So I guess I'm the youngest by a few seconds. But yeah, he looks at that too when it comes to autoimmune disease. It's a lack of distinguishability, if that makes sense, distinguishability between your body and what is foreign, because theoretically your immune system is basically attacking your own body, but it thinks to some degree that it's foreign, right? And so with something like type 1 diabetes, it's taking out dysfunctional cells in the pancreas that they think are something that's possibly causing you problems. And as a result, you're not able to produce insulin. And so that's one of Gabor Mate's kind of thoughts. It's like a lot of this shows up more than just the condition itself, but the way that you live your life. And I thought that was really interesting. For me personally, I think there was a lot of stress leading up to it. And I might have addressed like the nutritional piece, but I still didn't quite understand the all in go, how problematic that can be when it comes
mm.
to like minerals and being able to actually process carbohydrates. And so that at that time, if I had to give a theory, like that was probably a buildup of all the years of me doing that.
Have you ever looked at what emotions are stored in the pancreas in Chinese medicine?
That's something that I haven't delved into, Chinese medicine. I did get into that initially, I wanna say, like, early on in college where I forget exactly. There was some laser involved where it was, like, certain pressure points, especially around the ears.
Mhm.
I don't remember exactly what it was,
Yeah.
but yeah, that was my first inkling into it. I think I probably dismissed it maybe a little bit too early too, just because I almost grouped it in with some of the paleo stuff that I was doing
Sure.
at that time and I identified with minerals, but it's an area that I haven't explored just yet, like, really thoroughly to be able to educate and comment on that piece.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's get into some of the nutrients around blood sugar stuff. But before we go there, I think maybe we should just give a little primer
Mhm,
on maybe why should everyone care about blood sugar, whether you're diabetic or not. And then let's talk a little bit about
mhm.
insulin resistance.
Okay. Yeah, we can start with the why everybody should care about blood sugar. I think that's a good starting place because I think I get a lot of comments around blood sugar. I have a lot of like folks that are following me, not necessarily because they have diabetes, but they just want to improve the way they feel or their hormonal health or
Hmm.
reduce the stress on their
They're
body.
smart. They're smart people, right? If they're recognizing a blood sugar account can help them with that. So this is a good sign.
Absolutely. And I think that's the case. I have a very educated audience and wants to and loves to learn. So I think
Mhm.
that's very good. And when I look at blood sugar, certainly there's a level of truth that those with like diabetes, like me, or people with type 2, like that we probably need to pay a little bit more attention to the numbers specifically. But at the end of the day, we all have blood sugar. We all have a brain. We all have a pancreas. And since there are those commonalities, like to some degree, it's going to impact us. And I almost compare it to this, like blood sugar is that initial fuel source that we all use no matter what we're doing. Like for me to talk to you, Krista, it's taking blood sugar, it's taking energy to be able to do that, right? And so if we like just had like a car, like one of my favorite cars is like a Lamborghini. So if we had a Lamborghini out here, it's a beautiful design machine. It's really powerful, but that car is not going to move if it doesn't have gas, premium gas. And so it's the same thing for us. If we don't have that consistent source of fuel, our body's going to give us signs and symptoms that is probably off. And I think one of the companies that did a really good job of recognizing this was Snickers. And I don't know if you've seen those commercials back in the day. I think it was like 2010s, where one of them specifically was like Betty White was like playing football. And his friend was like, "You're playing like Betty White out there. Here, take a Snickers." And he eats the Snickers. And then all of a sudden he's playing like himself again. And the tagline is, "You're not you when you're hungry." I'm not saying to go out and eat a Snickers, but what I am saying is you are not you when your blood sugar is out of balance either, right? Because it can show up in the form of a few different things, depending on which stage that you're identifying it. It can come up initially as symptoms. So you can feel like more hangry, meaning you can't go long without eating. You have to eat very quickly, very soon. Otherwise, you will feel more angry emotionally. You'll tend to feel more fatigued. I noticed in a lot of clients, they tend to crash like in the afternoons, like that 1 to 3 p.m., where they're like really needing something like sugary or like a coffee. They often get like a blood sugar crash where they're really not feeling like themselves. So they often live on like caffeine and sugary beverages to feel good. I find a lot of clients have like sugar cravings. If it's more of an extensive problem, I also see clients that have more weight gain around their stomach, even brain fog, where they might try to recall what they want to say, but they might not have the words to really say it. I also see folks, especially with PCOS, have more menstrual cycle irregularities where maybe their cycle is a little bit longer. I see especially a low immunity where folks are getting sick like really frequently, even frequent urination, challenges with sleep as well. So in the short term, it can show up as minor signs like that. In the long term, the more that blood sugar is dysregulated, it can show up more in terms of like symptoms in terms of conditions. So it can be like PCOS, it can be prediabetes, it can be insulin resistance, it can be more susceptibility to autoimmune disease as well. So Hashimoto's, psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, things like that, right? For other folks too, if this is a long-standing issue, we know that like hormonal health is such a popular niche. And I think many
Buzzword.
times yes, buzzword, that's a great term for it. And I think many times it's just, how do I support progesterone, or how do I support estrogen detoxification, or how do I lower my testosterone, or for males, how do I increase my testosterone or thyroid panel? But I think a lot of times we're missing some of the roots. And one of the roots of good hormonal health is actually good blood sugar, because good blood sugar balance ultimately takes the stress off our body. So we can either produce those hormones in the right amount, or our body can utilize them better. And so that's why I think for many people, they might have normal lab work, normal hormonal levels, but their body still is experiencing those symptoms because they're not able to use those hormones very well. So I see that quite a bit too. And so that's where it's more of a longer standing issue, where these blood sugar imbalances have been happening for months, years, decades at a time.
Mhm. So we'll come back to insulin resistance, but you made me jump to another question, which was, let's talk about the biomarkers you use when you're helping your clients looking for blood sugar dysregulation before it's on someone else's radar. You might be running mineral tests, but are you also running specific blood tests?
Yes, this is a great question. It ultimately depends on the client, and I can give you a few examples of how I might typically approach this. When it comes to like testing specifically, there's two different tests that I typically will run depending on the person. Now, if the person, I have a lot of clients that have like reactive hypoglycemia as well, or low blood sugar throughout the day. And so for those individuals, or for people with like type 1 diabetes, even for folks that have PCOS, like a HTMA, or what's called a hair tissue mineral analysis, I found to be very helpful. And especially the blood sugar ratio, it's a part of the test. It's a ratio between calcium and magnesium, if you're not totally familiar with that. Both of those minerals play a huge role in the result of someone's blood sugar. For example, calcium, it's a huge signaler for insulin. For magnesium, it's big in insulin sensitivity and carb tolerance. In other words, the ability to tolerate carbs and still keep your blood sugar within a good standing. Now, when I see this ratio is high, meaning the amount of calcium is above the amount of magnesium listed on the test, I find for many people, they're going to struggle with low blood sugar because they're relying a lot on their insulin to support keeping their blood sugar within range, right? And so that can happen for a few different reasons, and I can certainly delve into more of that if you'd like. But that is one of the first things that I would look at to really tell what does someone's mineral balance look like and how is their lifestyle and nutrition ultimately setting themselves up for that kind of mineral balance. And how can we slightly adjust this so that they get more stable blood sugars moving forward, right? And that's not just about, in my opinion, with HTMAs, it's not just about, hey, you're low in calcium or you're low in here's magnesium or here's calcium, right? Because one of the biggest influencers of this is, in fact, stress. And I almost compare it to this. If we're trying to improve our blood sugar balance, envision like filling up a bucket of water, but that bucket of water has holes in it. And so the more that you try to fill it up, the more that water is actually going to leak out. And so if we were just to continue pouring water, and that would be very ineffective, right? The water is just going to seep out. Versus if we looked at plugging those holes, in other words, the stressors that person has in their life, or improving their resiliency, the way that they perceive those stressors, that's going to help to plug those holes. So when they do consume that calcium or when they do consume that magnesium, it actually sticks. They actually retain that a lot more effectively, right? Because with stress, what ends up happening is you use minerals more quickly. And so that is especially the case with someone with blood sugar imbalances. The more widely their blood sugar swings, the more imbalanced and the more deficient they tend to be with minerals. And HTMA will certainly show a piece of that. I do like to run something like that if the client can benefit. If they're really insulin resistant, I tend to run something called a Monty panel. And so that is in the Morley Robbins root cause protocol world, that's a little bit more familiar. But if you're not familiar with that, it's basically a panel, a blood panel that is, that really looks at the relationship between iron and copper and the minerals that impact that ultimately. And with iron and copper, it is a huge piece for those with insulin resistance because this is not to say that iron is bad. I don't want to make that seem that way. But when we have an excessive amount in our body stored away, what it tends to do is lower metabolism. It impacts the beta cells of the pancreas. It makes them not work as well, which makes our body unable to produce adequate levels of insulin. It is stored away in our liver, which makes our liver kick out more glucose in the bloodstream, especially when we're not eating, right? And so when you have a ton of iron stored away in your body, it's actually really not a good thing because it increases inflammation. It decreases our ability to effectively manage blood sugar. And that's why for many folks, when they have a lot of iron stored away, they're going to have problems with, typically I see blood sugar, energy and digestion are those main pieces. And this is especially true even when they're not eating, which can be really confusing, right? Because I think we associate blood sugar problems with like just eating too many carbs or too much sugar. But I find for many clients, when they have a lot of iron stored away, their blood sugar in the morning will be the highest part of the day, meaning when they're not eating, when they've been fasting for 7, 8, 9 hours. And part of that is because when iron is stored in the liver, it increases the liver to kick out more glucose in the bloodstream, therefore raising blood sugar. And so by addressing that relationship, we can improve someone's blood sugar balance, insulin sensitivity by addressing that ratio.
I don't know if we want to go into this, but the blood panel for iron is complex. So,
It is.
what are some of the markers blood wise, not tissue wise, an HTMA, that you're looking at for lots of iron being stored in the body?
Yeah, that's a great question. And
Probably one of the most underrated nutrients I use in practice is potassium. Low potassium can be a huge factor in energy, relapsing gut issues, thyroid function, and even regulating blood pressure. Now, your blood test for potassium will look normal most of the time. Otherwise, you'd feel faint and maybe like you're going to pass out. But your tissue levels of potassium will decline with an increase of the stress hormone cortisol. Big picture, I find it's just really hard for humans to get enough food-based potassium in their diet unless they live in a tropical place. And I'm usually recommending my clients get at least 4,000 milligrams of food-based potassium per day. That's why I really commonly recommend Jigsaw's pickleball cocktail to help my clients. It's one of the only electrolyte products on the market with a hefty dose of potassium at 800 milligrams per scoop, when most electrolyte products only have about 200 milligrams, making it really hard to reach those high doses of food-based potassium I recommend per day. Plus, it's automatically the best choice if my client is dealing with swelling, which can be related to imbalances of sodium and potassium in the tissue. I'm a potassium evangelist, and Jigsaw's pickleball cocktail is one of my most used tools of the trade. You can get a discount on any of Jigsaw's amazing products, including pickleball, at jigsawhealth.com with the code LESSSTRESSED10. That's 3 S's, less stressed 10.
This is the thing that gets confusing with iron too, because we don't want to label iron as just being one measurement because it's not. And if we just label it as one, there'll be people that have anemia or low iron and actually have a lot of iron stored away in their tissues. So you can be deficient in one area and overloaded in another. And so I look at iron as being like in two places, one in the bloodstream and another stored away in our tissues, like our liver, for example. And one of the places that I look at primarily is ferritin. It's a reflection of how much iron is stored away in someone's tissues. I'm not trying to play doctor here. With any clients that I work with, that's for the physicians. This blood panel is more to show us trends of the higher that this ferritin value is, the more problems that person is going to have with digestion, energy, and blood sugar and insulin resistance. So if I see a ferritin value that's like 50, 100, 200, 300. I've seen 500 before. That person is going to be definitely not feeling their best. They're going to have more insulin resistance. They're going to have trouble with carbohydrates. They're not going to be feeling very energized to do exercise. For most people, their digestion is going to be very slow. They may not be able to tolerate many things. They may be bloated, a lot of gas. And so when it comes to storage, that's the one of the areas that I look at. Now, there are other areas of markers of iron too that we really need to consider because someone could have, like, theoretically a high ferritin, like at 200, let's just say, and have a low iron. Like for a female, if it's under, that would be considered low iron, right? And so you'd want to do things differently in different steps depending on where those measurements might lie. And so I look at serum iron, I look at what's called TIBC or the binding capacity. I look at iron saturation as well. All of those have to do with the amount of iron on board or how much our body's able to transport to different areas. And so if you're able to look at the full picture of that, it's a lot more clear than us just saying, hey, you have low iron or you have high iron, because the spots where that iron is at will dictate the steps that will be supportive for them.
Yeah, I would say iron is probably one of the very oversimplified things in conventional medicine, right?
Yeah.
Probably. Generally, when they have a lot of high tissue iron, is the recommendation donating blood?
Good question. It depends. With working with a lot of people in this predicament, there are some that theoretically are ready to donate, meaning they have enough to give, but they might be struggling with other symptoms. Maybe it's the fatigue, maybe it's like lightheadedness, maybe it's their sleep is really struggling. And I typically would never start someone off just with donating unless it was really their serum level was really high. And so here's the distinction. There can be some people with high ferritins and low serum iron, and there can be people with high ferritins and high serum iron, right? The person with the high serum iron will be more ready to donate than someone who has a low serum iron because they have nothing to give. Because when we think about giving blood, it's coming from the serum, it's not coming from
Yeah.
ferritin, right? And so if we don't have enough to give, even if we have a higher ferritin, if they were to donate, they'd probably feel worse afterwards. And I've had clients that have done that, gone against kind of my suggestion, and they have made the connection that they have high iron levels, and they have made the connection between, yeah, I need to donate blood at some point, and they have gone through it first before I said that they probably should. And as a result, they felt it for a few days afterwards in terms of feeling fatigued, just down, and really not having that resiliency, that energy that they really need to do their work or care for their kids throughout the day. The timing with blood donations is important in understanding the context. It's not just about the ferritin. It's about making sure that you have enough to give, because when you have a low serum iron, it's like trying to pour from an empty cup. There's nothing
Mhm.
really there to give. And as a result, most people are going to feel that.
Yeah, are you mobilizing it from the liver with liver support, and then are you rechecking in the blood before you do a donation?
Yep. Yep. For most people, that is the way that would be most supportive, is really getting that iron moving again, because iron isn't really a problem when it's being put to use, like when it's being able to form like red blood cells. If we can put it to use, that's a good thing. The problem is when it gets stagnant and it gets stored in other organs, that's a huge issue. And that's what leads to the inflammation. And so, what we want to do if someone especially has a low serum value is we want to move that iron from the storage places that it's in to being able to be used so that we can get rid of it with a donation. And so things like real food vitamin C, liver, like the copper and vitamin A from liver, copper and vitamin A rich foods, especially from seafood, those can be ways that over time we can get that iron moving again. But there is one caveat to this because we can be doing all of that, but if we're not regulating the stress throughout our day, by providing outlets and breaks and things that really restore us, really re-energize us, there's actually research to show that iron will just stay stuck in the organs that it's in, meaning it won't be able to be mobilized as well if we don't have that in place. And so that's the other thing. And I think for some people, they have that experience when they feel like they're doing a lot of the things right, but maybe their labs aren't improving, or maybe they're not able to donate just yet. A lot of times it has to do with that stress piece because that is a huge piece with the body making iron available. And the thing of the matter is it won't make iron available unless our body is less inflamed and less stressed. And so by having that nourishing routine outside of just food, it's really one of the most effective things to help to regulate iron levels as well.
Yeah. Helping clients with stress regulation is, I always say, it's all a lifelong thing for us, right? I don't know about you, but it's, all of this stuff nutritionally, biochemically, the physiology, and then we just have to fix your stress as the thing. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting feeling.
Oh, it is. It is. And I think none of us are, I don't think, ever going to be perfect at it. Like I have stress. I'm sure, Krista, you have stress. And I think whenever I approach this conversation, people are like, Isaac, I can't get rid of stress. There's no way in this modern world that I can. And I would, frankly agree with that. I'm staring at a laptop with blue light coming directly at my face. There's EMFs all over the place. There's things that we could say about food here and there that probably aren't the most supportive things. But it's not, in my opinion, about like, getting rid of stress. It's about making our body more resilient to it. Even I consider him the founder of stress, Hans Selye, the brilliant physician that he has the book Stress of Life. That is one of the more influential like books that I've had a chance to read. And he talked about this. He said, it's not the stress that kills us, it's our perception of it.
Mhm.
Perception of stress is a huge thing. And in my experience too, and this is personal and professional, I think we're able to perceive stress a little bit more supportively when we're in a good, healthy metabolic state, meaning we're providing nourishing routines, nourishing foods, supplements, downtime that our body really needs. Because when it's not getting what it needs, it tends to feel more stressed. It tends to feel more anxious. We tend to react to stress a little bit more than maybe what we normally would be if we hadn't gotten what we need out of our routine.
Yeah, for sure.
Just keep breaking. I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little